The howling wind slapped against Sienna Turner's face as she struggled through knee-deep snow, her wagon wheel irreparably broken and her horse gone, having bolted hours ago when the blizzard first struck. Montana Territory, 1876, was unforgiving in December, especially to a woman traveling alone through unfamiliar country. "Keep moving," she whispered to herself, teeth chattering as she pulled her woolen coat tighter. The temperature had plummeted so rapidly that afternoon that the threatening clouds had caught her off guard. Now, as darkness approached, Sienna knew she was in grave danger. 20 miles outside of Jerome, Montana, Xavier Vaughn rode his stallion along the snow-covered trail, heading back to his ranch after delivering cattle to a neighboring property. At 32, he'd spent most of his life in these mountains, knew every ridge and valley like the calluses on his hands. The storm had come swiftly, even for him, and he'd almost delayed his journey home. Now he was grateful he hadn't. Through the swirling white, he spotted something dark against the pristine landscape, a figure stumbling through the snow. Xavier narrowed his eyes, pulling his bandana down from his face. "Hello," he called, his voice nearly lost in the howling wind. He urged his horse forward, closing the distance. Sienna Turner heard nothing over the storm's rage until the horse was nearly upon her. She turned, half frozen, to see a tall man atop a powerful black stallion, his face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat crusted with snow. "Miss." The stranger called. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" Sienna tried to respond, but her lips were too numb, her body shaking too violently. Her knees buckled beneath her, and she sank into the snow. Xavier dismounted in one fluid motion, crossing to her in 3 long strides. He knelt beside her, taking in her blue-tinged lips and ice-crusted eyelashes. "Can you stand?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "My wagon," she managed, "broke down several miles back." Xavier didn't hesitate. He removed his heavy buffalo coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, then lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, despite the sodden clothing weighing her down. "I've got a place about 3 miles from here," he said, setting her carefully on his horse before mounting behind her. "Hold on to the saddle horn." Sienna felt herself being pressed against the man's solid chest, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. Heat radiated from him, and she instinctively leaned back into that warmth. "Stay awake, miss," he urged when her head lolled against his shoulder. "What's your name?" "Sienna," she murmured. "Sienna Turner." "Xavier Vaughn," he replied. "Most folks call me Zav." As they rode through the blinding snow, Xavier kept talking, asking her questions about where she'd come from, where she was headed, anything to keep her conscious. He learned she was 26, traveling from Pennsylvania to Jerome to take a position as a schoolteacher. The school board had sent for her months ago, and she'd finally made the journey west, only to be caught in this unexpected early winter storm. "Almost there," Xavier assured her as a golden glow appeared through the curtain of white. "That's my ranch, Horizon Line, I call it." The main house was larger than Sienna had expected, built of solid logs with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. As they approached, a door opened, spilling warm light into the snowy night. "Mr. Vaughn," called an older man, hurrying down the steps. "We was getting worried." "Thomas, take my horse," Xavier ordered, carefully dismounting with Sienna still held firmly in his arms. "Found this lady stranded in the storm. Get Martha to prepare hot water and blankets." Thomas nodded, his weathered face creasing with concern as he took in Sienna's condition. Inside, the house was warm and smelled of pine smoke, and something savory cooking. Xavier carried Sienna directly to a sitting room where a massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames crackling cheerfully within it. An older woman with iron-gray hair appeared, clucking her tongue in distress. "Merciful heavens, the poor dear's half frozen. Bring her close to the fire, Mr. Vaughn." "Martha, this is Miss Turner," Xavier said, gently placing Sienna on a chair pulled close to the hearth. "She's the new schoolteacher for Jerome." Martha nodded briskly. I've heated water. We need to get her out of these wet clothes and warm her up proper. Xavier cleared his throat, suddenly aware of the impropriety of the situation. I'll leave you to it then. I'll check on things in the barn. As he strode out, Sienna found herself following him with her eyes. Through the haze of cold and exhaustion, she registered his tall, powerful frame, the way he moved with quiet confidence. That man, Martha said, noticing Sienna's gaze, found you just in time, I'd say. Now let's get you warm before frostbite sets in. With Martha's help, Sienna changed into a flannel nightgown and thick woolen robe that the housekeeper provided. Her fingers and toes burned painfully as circulation returned, but Martha assured her that was a good sign. It meant no permanent damage had been done. The storm's getting worse, Martha commented, glancing out the window at the blinding white. You'll be staying with us tonight, dear. Likely tomorrow too, the way it's coming down. I don't want to impose, Sienna began, but Martha waved away her concerns. Nonsense. Mr. Vaughn wouldn't have it any other way. He's a good man, though he doesn't talk much about himself. Seated in the dining room an hour later, wrapped in blankets with her stockinged feet on a warming stone, Sienna watched as Xavier entered, now wearing dry clothes himself. His dark hair was damp from melted snow, and his face, now fully visible to her for the first time, was striking strong-jawed and weathered from years in the elements, with alert gray eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Feeling better, Miss Turner? He asked, accepting a steaming mug of coffee from Martha. Much, thank you, Sienna replied. I don't know how to repay your kindness, Mr. Vaughn. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Out here, saving someone from freezing to death is just being neighborly. Over a simple but hearty meal of venison stew, fresh bread, and apple pie, Sienna learned that Xavier had been in Montana Territory for 12 years. He'd come west as a young man, worked as a ranch hand, then slowly built up his own spread, which now covered nearly 800 acres. And you've never married? Sienna asked, then immediately flushed at her own boldness. I apologize, that was terribly forward of me. Xavier's face remained impassive, but something flickered behind his eyes. No need for apologies, and no, never found the time for it, I suppose. Martha, clearing away dishes, made a small sound that might have been disagreement, but she said nothing. Later, as Sienna was shown to a guest bedroom, she found herself wondering about the quiet cowboy who'd saved her life. There was a sadness about him, a distance she couldn't quite understand. The blizzard raged for 3 days, keeping Sienna at Horizon Line Ranch. During that time, she recovered her strength and began to learn more about her reluctant host. Xavier was respected by his ranch hands, generous with his employees, and known throughout the area as a man of his word. Yet he kept to himself, rode the boundaries of his property alone for hours each day, and seemed most comfortable in solitude. On the morning of the 4th day, when the storm had finally passed, leaving behind pristine white drifts and a crystal-clear blue sky, Xavier announced he would take Sienna into Jerome. The roads should be passable now, he said over breakfast. I'll have Thomas bring the sleigh around. Thank you, Sienna said, surprised at the twinge of disappointment she felt. I've imposed on you far too long already. Xavier's gaze met hers. It's been no imposition, Miss Turner. The ride to Jerome took most of the morning, the sleigh gliding smoothly over the packed snow. Xavier pointed out landmarks along the way, a creek where he'd caught his first trout as a boy, the ridge where mountain lions sometimes sunned themselves in spring, the distant peaks that signaled changes in weather. Jerome itself was a bustling town of nearly 3,000 souls, with a main street lined with businesses: mercantile, bank, saloon, hotel, and at the far end, a white clapboard schoolhouse with a small bell tower. That'll be your domain, Xavier said, nodding toward it. The sleigh came to a stop outside the Jerome Hotel, a 3-story building with gingerbread trim and wide windows. As Xavier helped Sienna down, a portly man in a black suit hurried toward them. Miss Turner, thank the Lord you're safe. He turned to Xavier with a hearty handshake. Vaughn, you old wolf. Did you rescue our schoolmarm from that terrible storm, Mr. Holloway? Sienna greeted the man, recognizing the chairman of the school board from his correspondence. Yes, Mr. Vaughn found me when my wagon broke down. I'd surely have perished without his help. Ezekiel Holloway beamed at them both. Well, a fortunate meeting indeed. Come inside, Miss Turner. We've had your room ready for days, wondering when you might arrive. The children are eager to begin their lessons with a proper teacher. Xavier tipped his hat. I'll be going then. Your trunks should arrive on tomorrow's stage from Helena, Miss Turner. Mr. Vaughn, Sienna said quickly before he could turn away. I truly cannot thank you enough. His eyes softened slightly. You're welcome in my home anytime, Miss Turner. With that, he climbed back into the sleigh and drove away, leaving Sienna standing in the snow-covered street, watching until he disappeared around a corner. The next week passed in a flurry of activity as Sienna settled into her new role. The schoolhouse had 28 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age, all at various levels of education. Some of the ranch children had received only sporadic teaching from parents or older siblings, while the town children had benefited from occasional visiting teachers. Sienna threw herself into her work, organizing the students by ability rather than age, developing lesson plans, and beginning the task of establishing a proper library. The town embraced her warmly, with families inviting her to Sunday dinners and town functions. Yet she found her thoughts drifting frequently to Horizon Line Ranch, to the quiet man with watchful eyes who'd pulled her from the snow. She'd seen him only once since arriving in Jerome, riding through town on his way to the bank, and they'd exchanged only the briefest of greetings. It was 2 weeks after her arrival that Sienna heard a knock at her door late one afternoon as she was grading arithmetic exercises. She opened it to find Xavier Vaughn standing on her small porch, hat in hand, looking somewhat uncomfortable. Mr. Vaughn, she said, unable to hide her surprise. Please come in. He stepped inside, ducking slightly through the doorway. Her small teacher's quarters attached to the schoolhouse suddenly seemed even smaller with his presence. Miss Turner, he began, turning his hat in his hands, I've come to return something of yours. From his pocket, he withdrew a small silver locket. Martha found this beneath the chair where you sat that first night. We thought you might be missing it. Sienna's hand flew to her throat. My mother's locket, I hadn't even realized. She accepted it with genuine gratitude. Thank you for bringing it all this way. I was coming to town anyway, he said, then added, How are you finding Jerome? The people have been very kind, she replied, and the children eager to learn. Won't you sit down? I've just made tea. To her surprise, he accepted, taking a seat at her small table while she poured 2 cups from the pot on the stove. She noticed his eyes taking in the neat rows of books, the carefully arranged teaching materials, the vase of pine branches she'd placed on the windowsill to bring some greenery into the winter room. You've made it homey, he commented. I try, she said, placing a cup before him. Though I must admit, your ranch house felt more like a home than anywhere I've been in years. His eyebrows rose slightly. High praise from a city lady. I was raised in Philadelphia, she acknowledged, but my father was a doctor who often took me on his country calls. I've always loved open spaces. What brought you all the way to Montana Territory? Xavier asked, sipping his tea. Surely there were teaching positions closer to home. Sienna's smile faltered slightly. I needed a fresh start. My fiancé died last year influenza. Afterward, everything in Pennsylvania reminded me of him. Xavier's expression softened with understanding. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you, she said quietly. And you, what brought you west? A shadow passed over his face. War. After Gettysburg, I couldn't stomach the East anymore. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, each recognizing in the other a kindred spirit who understood grief. I should be going, Xavier said finally, rising to his feet. Got supplies to pick up at the mercantile before heading back. At the door, he hesitated. The town's having a Christmas social next Saturday. Will you be attending? Yes, Mr. Holloway insists all teachers participate in community events, Sienna replied. Will you come? Not usually one for socials, he admitted, but perhaps I'll make an exception this time. After he left, Sienna stood at her window, watching him stride down the snow-covered street, noticing how other men nodded respectfully as he passed, how he stopped to help an elderly woman navigate an icy patch of walkway. True to his word, Xavier appeared at the Christmas social held in the town hall decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbon. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance, wearing a clean shirt and string tie beneath his best vest, his usually unruly dark hair slicked back with water. Several young women immediately took notice of his presence, including the mercantile owner's daughter, who made a point of standing near the punch bowl where Xavier had stationed himself. Mr. Vaughn rarely attends these functions, Ezekiel Holloway told Sienna as they watched children playing musical chairs in one corner of the room. You must have made quite an impression. Sienna felt her cheeks warm. I'm sure he's only being polite after my imposition during the storm. Holloway chuckled. Vaughn doesn't do anything out of mere politeness, my dear. Man says what he means and means what he says. Later in the evening, as a small group of musicians began playing, Xavier approached Sienna. Would you care to dance, Miss Turner? He asked formally. She accepted his outstretched hand, aware of the curious glances from others as he led her to the small dance floor. His hand was warm at her waist, his movements surprisingly graceful for such a tall man. You dance well, Mr. Vaughn. A hint of a smile touched his lips. My mother insisted I learn, said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a wounded buffalo. Sienna laughed. She sounds formidable. She was, he said, a flicker of old pain crossing his face. As they danced, Sienna became aware of how perfectly they moved together, how natural it felt to be in his arms. When the music ended, he didn't immediately release her hand. Would you allow me to call on you properly, Miss Turner? He asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. I would like that very much, she replied. Their courtship progressed slowly through the winter months. Xavier would ride into town once or twice a week, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, horehound candy from Helena, a hand-carved wooden pen holder for her desk. They took sleigh rides on Sunday afternoons, had dinner at the hotel restaurant, and gradually shared more of their histories with each other. Sienna learned that Xavier had lost both parents by the time he was 20, his father to a mining accident when Xavier was just 16, his mother to pneumonia 4 years later. He'd fought for the Union in the Civil War, seen horrors he wouldn't describe, and afterward couldn't face returning to their Pennsylvania farm. Instead, he'd headed west, working his way across the country until finding his place in Montana Territory. In turn, she told him about growing up as an only child, losing her mother to cancer when she was 12, and being raised thereafter by her physician father, who'd encouraged her education at a time when many still believed extensive schooling inappropriate for young women. He sounds like a good man, Xavier commented as they walked along Jerome's Main Street one crisp February afternoon. He was, Sienna agreed. He would have liked you, I think. He valued honesty above all things. As winter began to loosen its grip on the land, bringing the first hints of spring, Xavier invited Sienna to Sunday dinner at Horizon Line Ranch. The snow had mostly melted from the valley floors, making the roads passable by buggy, and he arrived to collect her in a freshly painted rig pulled by matching bay horses. Martha greeted Sienna like a long-lost daughter, embracing her warmly and exclaiming over how well she looked. Teaching agrees with you, the housekeeper declared. You've got roses in your cheeks now, not like that night Mr. Vaughn brought you in half frozen. The ranch house seemed different in daylight, warmer, more welcoming than Sienna remembered from those blizzard days. Xavier had clearly made efforts to prepare for her visit. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, new cushions brightened the chairs, and vases of early spring wildflowers dotted the tables. After dinner, Xavier showed her around the property, the barn with its fine horses, the blacksmith shop where tools were crafted and repaired, the bunkhouse where most of his ranch hands lived, the vegetable gardens just being prepared for planting. "You've built something remarkable here," Sienna said as they stood on a rise overlooking the ranch buildings and the mountains beyond. "It's still growing," he replied, "each year a little better than the last." She noticed he spoke of the ranch as a living thing, something that evolved and improved with nurturing not unlike the children she taught. "I admire that," she told him, "the patience to build something lasting." Xavier turned to face her, his expression serious. "Sienna," he said, using her given name for the first time, "I'm not a man who finds words easily. But these past months knowing you, it's changed things for me." Her heart quickened. "What things?" "Everything," he said simply. "Before I found you in that storm, I was just existing. Running the ranch, doing what needed doing, but not really living." He took her gloved hands in his. "I haven't felt truly alive since before the war, until now." Sienna squeezed his hands, her eyes bright with emotion. "I understand. After James died, I thought that part of my life was over. I came west to escape memories, not to find happiness." "Are you happy here, Sienna?" he asked, his voice husky. "Yes," she whispered, "more than I ever expected to be again." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I'm not asking for answers today. Just wanted you to know my mind." As spring progressed into summer, Sienna and Xavier's relationship deepened. The whole town observed their courtship with interest, some with approval, others with disappointment that the territory's most eligible bachelor was being claimed. Xavier became a familiar figure at school functions, town meetings, and Sunday services, no longer the solitary rancher who kept to himself. In late May, during a picnic by the creek that ran through Xavier's property, he finally spoke of the darkness that had haunted him since the war. "I was at Antietam," he said quietly as they sat on a blanket beneath a cottonwood tree. "And Gettysburg, saw things no man should see, did things I can't undo." Sienna listened, her hand resting lightly on his arm as he described the battles, the friends lost, the nightmares that still occasionally woke him. "After Mother died, there was nothing keeping me east. Couldn't face the farm where we'd been happy, couldn't stomach the cities with their noise and crowds. Kept moving west until the land opened up enough that I could breathe again." He looked at her, his gray eyes troubled. "For years, I've kept people at arm's length, easier that way, safer." "And now," Sienna asked softly, "now I find myself wanting things I'd given up on, a true home, family." He swallowed hard. "Love." She leaned forward and for the first time pressed her lips gently to his. It was a brief, tender kiss, but it sent warmth flooding through both of them. "I think," she whispered, "those things might be wanting you too." In June, as the school year ended, Xavier asked Sienna to marry him. They were riding along the ridge that marked the northern boundary of his property. The valley spread out below them like a green and gold quilt in the summer sunshine. "This land needs a mistress," he said, reaching across to take her hand as they sat on their horses side by side. "And I need a wife. Will you have me, Sienna Turner?" Her smile was luminous. "Yes, Xavier Vaughn, I will." They were married in August in Jerome's small church, with the entire town turning out for the celebration. Martha wept openly as Sienna walked down the aisle in a gown of ivory silk sent from Philadelphia by her father's sister. Xavier, standing tall and straight in a new black suit, watched her approach with an expression of such naked adoration that several older women dabbed at their eyes. "Never thought I'd see the day," Thomas murmured to Martha as they watched the couple exchange vows. That blizzard was the best thing that ever happened to him. Their wedding night was a revelation for both of them. Xavier, despite his outward confidence, approached their intimacy with gentle reverence, treating Sienna as though she were made of precious glass. For her part, Sienna discovered passion she hadn't known she possessed, her body responding to his touch with eager desire. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the sheets of the massive oak bed that had belonged to Xavier's parents, Sienna traced the scars on his body, the bullet wound in his shoulder from the war, the long slash across his ribs from a run-in with a cornered mountain lion, the burn mark on his forearm from a branding iron accident. "Each one a story," she murmured, pressing her lips to a white line on his collarbone. "Each one a lesson," he replied, his fingers trailing through her unbound hair, "about survival, about what matters." She propped herself on one elbow, looking down at him in the moonlight streaming through the window. "And what matters, Mr. Vaughn?" His hand cupped her cheek. "This, you, us." Life settled into a rhythm as summer faded into autumn. Sienna continued teaching, riding to and from town each day on a gentle mare Xavier had trained specially for her. At home, she worked alongside Martha, learning the management of a large ranch household, keeping accounts, ordering supplies, and planning improvements to the main house. Xavier expanded his cattle operation, adding a small herd of Herefords to his primarily longhorn stock. He built a new wing onto the house, a library for Sienna filled with books ordered from as far away as New York and San Francisco. In November, as the first snowflakes began to fall, Sienna shared news that brought tears to Xavier's eyes. "A baby," he whispered, his hand gently covering her still flat abdomen. "You're certain?" Dr. Fletcher confirms it, she said, her own eyes shining. "Next summer we'll be 3. That night, as a gentle snowfall blanketed the ranch, Sienna woke to find Xavier's side of the bed empty. Wrapping herself in a robe, she padded through the quiet house, finding him standing at the large window in the sitting room staring out at the moonlit snow. "Xavier." She called softly, coming to stand beside him. "Is everything all right?" He turned to her, and she was startled to see tears tracking silently down his face. "I was thinking about that night," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "How close I came to not finding you. If I'd left an hour earlier, if I'd taken the lower trail instead." She slipped her arms around his waist, leaning her head against his chest. "But you did find me. I keep thinking about how different my life would be right now, how empty." His arms tightened around her. "I was so cold inside, Sienna, for years. Like that blizzard had somehow gotten inside me and never thawed." She reached up to touch his face. "And now I'm warm again," he whispered, bending to kiss her. "Because of you." They stood together watching the snow, the past and future meeting in that quiet moment of gratitude. Spring brought new life to Horizon Line Ranch. Calves frolicked in the green meadows, wildflowers carpeted the hillsides, and Sienna's belly grew round with their child. She continued teaching until the end of the school year in June, then turned her attention to preparing the nursery in the room adjacent to their bedroom. Xavier insisted on building the cradle himself, working late into the night in his workshop, creating a piece that could become a family heirloom. Martha knitted blankets and tiny clothes, while women from town and surrounding ranches brought gifts of handmade quilts and soft toys. On a hot July evening, after a day of unexpected labor that had Xavier pacing the hallway in terror, their son was born. They named him Samuel, after Xavier's father, giving him the middle name William after Sienna's. "He has your eyes," Xavier whispered, one finger gently stroking the baby's downy cheek as he lay in Sienna's arms. "And your spirit, I'd wager." "Poor child," she teased, "stuck with such stubborn parents." Xavier laughed, a sound that had become increasingly common in the house over the past year. "He'll need that stubbornness. It's not always an easy life out here." "But a good one," Sienna said, smiling up at her husband, "the best I could imagine." As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Xavier added sheep to his operation, built a new, larger barn, and hired additional hands to manage the expanding enterprise. Sienna divided her time between motherhood and teaching, now offering lessons 3 days a week at the ranch for the children of employees and neighboring homesteads too distant from town for regular schooling. In the spring of 1879, Sienna's father came west to visit, spending 2 months at the ranch getting to know his son-in-law and grandson. Dr. Turner, despite his initial reservations about his daughter marrying a rancher and living in what he considered wilderness, found himself charmed by Xavier's quiet intelligence and evident devotion to Sienna. "You've done well for yourself, my girl," he told Sienna one evening as they sat on the porch watching Xavier teaching 2-year-old Samuel to feed a bottle lamb. "Far better than I feared when you announced you were heading to Montana Territory." "I found my place," she said simply. "And the love I thought I'd never find again." In the autumn of that year, tragedy struck when a measles epidemic swept through Jerome and the surrounding areas. Sienna, with her father's medical knowledge to guide her, turned the ranch house into an impromptu hospital for the most serious cases. Xavier rode tirelessly between isolated homesteads, delivering medicine and food to families too ill to care for themselves. For 3 weeks, they worked around the clock, snatching sleep in brief intervals, determined to save as many lives as possible. Samuel was sent to stay with Thomas and his wife in their cabin at the far edge of the property, safely away from the contagion. When the epidemic finally burned itself out, 6 children and 3 adults from the area had died, but many more had been saved by the Vaughn's efforts. The experience left them exhausted but more tightly bonded to their community and to each other. "I've never been prouder to be your husband," Xavier told Sienna as they finally collapsed into their own bed after the last patient had gone home. "Your strength these past weeks, it humbles me." "We did it together," she reminded him, curling against his side. "As we do everything." The following spring brought another surprise: twins, a boy and a girl born within minutes of each other on a clear April morning. They named the boy Edward after Sienna's father and the girl Elizabeth after Xavier's mother. 3 children under 4, Xavier marveled, watching as Sienna nursed the twins while Samuel played with wooden blocks on the floor nearby. "We're going to need a bigger house." "Or at least more help," Sienna agreed with a tired smile. Martha, now moving more slowly with arthritis but still the heart of the household, immediately took charge of finding a young woman from town to assist with the children and housework. Lily Chen, the 18-year-old daughter of the Chinese laundry owner in Jerome, proved to be a godsend, her quiet efficiency and genuine love for the children making her an instant addition to the family. As the years passed, Horizon Line Ranch grew into one of the most successful operations in the territory. Xavier's innovative breeding programs and land management practices were studied and emulated by other ranchers. Sienna's educational efforts expanded into a proper school on the ranch property, serving children from miles around with a curriculum that rivaled Eastern institutions. Samuel, at 10, was his father's shadow, learning the ranch business from the ground up, while Edward and Elizabeth, now 8, showed their own distinct personalities, Edward quiet and bookish like his mother, Elizabeth fiery and determined like her father. In 1887, Montana Territory was abuzz with talk of statehood, and Xavier found himself reluctantly drawn into politics. Community leaders urged him to represent their interests at territorial conventions, valuing his straightforward manner and reputation for fairness. "They want me to consider running for the state legislature when Montana achieves statehood," he told Sienna one night as they sat by the fire after the children had gone to bed. "Will you do it?" she asked, looking up from her mending. Xavier sighed, running a hand through his hair, now showing threads of silver at the temples. "I never saw myself as a politician, nor did I," she smiled, "but you're respected, Xavier. People listen when you speak. And what would you think about being a politician's wife? Having to entertain, attend functions, perhaps even live part-time in Helena." Sienna set aside her sewing and moved to sit on the arm of his chair, her hand resting on his shoulder. "I think I would be proud to support my husband in whatever role he chooses to take on. As you've always supported me." He pulled her onto his lap, still as strong at 43 as he had been at 32 when he'd found her in the blizzard. Have I told you lately that marrying you was the smartest thing I ever did? Not since breakfast, she teased, leaning in to kiss him. Later that year, during a rare trip east to visit Sienna's aging father, they took the children to the battlefield at Gettysburg. Standing on the now peaceful ridge where he had once fought for his life and seen friends die, Xavier finally felt the last of the war's shadows lift from his heart. I carried the weight of this place for so long, he told Sienna as they stood hand in hand, watching their children collecting wildflowers in the field below. But here now with you and them it feels reconciled somehow. Time heals, she said softly, and love transforms. Montana achieved statehood in 1889, and Xavier did indeed win election to the first state legislature, serving 2 terms before returning full-time to the ranch. By then, Samuel was 16 and capable of managing many aspects of the operation with Thomas's guidance when Xavier was away. The ranch house had expanded again, now a sprawling, comfortable home that often hosted gatherings of neighbors, political colleagues, and the growing circle of friends the family had cultivated. Martha, though now retired from active housekeeping duties, still lived with them, holding court from her rocking chair by the kitchen fire, dispensing wisdom and affection to 3 generations. On a cold December evening in 1891, 15 years after Xavier had found Sienna in the blizzard, they stood together on their bedroom balcony, looking out over their domain. The ranch buildings glowed with lamplight, smoke curled from chimneys, and in the distance, the mountains stood silhouetted against a star-filled sky. I was thinking about our anniversary, Xavier said, his arm around Sienna's waist. Our wedding anniversary isn't until August, she reminded him. He smiled, turning her to face him. I wasn't talking about our wedding, I meant the day we met. 15 years ago today, I found you half frozen in the snow. Sienna's eyes widened. You remember the exact date, how could I forget? It was the day my life changed. He kissed her softly. I've been planning something. A surprise. The following morning, Xavier loaded the family into a large sleigh, refusing to tell them their destination. They traveled for nearly 2 hours, the children singing songs and playing guessing games about where they might be heading. Finally, they crested a ridge and Sienna gasped. Below them lay a small valley she hadn't visited in years, and in its center stood a new structure, a small but perfect cabin with smoke rising from its chimney. What is this? She asked as Xavier guided the horses down the slope. The spot where we first met, he explained. I had the cabin built this fall, thought it might be a place we could come sometimes, just the 2 of us, to remember. Tears filled Sienna's eyes as the children exclaimed over the cabin and bounded from the sleigh to explore it. You sentimental fool, she whispered, kissing his cheek. I thought that hard winter had frozen your heart for good. Xavier laughed, the sound echoing across the snow-covered valley. It did, my love, until you thought it. Inside, the cabin was a single cozy room with a stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, and large windows overlooking the valley. The children explored every corner while Xavier built up the fire and Sienna unpacked the picnic they'd brought. As they ate lunch together, Xavier shared stories with the children about the blizzard, embellishing slightly for dramatic effect, making them laugh with his description of their mother's indignation at being carried into a stranger's house like a sack of grain. If Papa hadn't found Mama in the storm, none of us would be here, Elizabeth observed with a child's straightforward logic. That's true, Xavier agreed, his eyes meeting Sienna's across the table. Sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings. That evening, after they'd returned to the main ranch and the children were asleep, Xavier and Sienna sat in their private sitting room, a tradition they'd established years ago, an hour each night just for themselves, no matter how busy life became. Did you ever imagine that night in the blizzard that we would have all this? Sienna asked, gesturing to encompass not just their home but the life they'd built. Xavier shook his head. I only knew I couldn't let you freeze to death, the rest. He smiled, taking her hand. The rest was your doing, My doing? How so? You brought warmth back into my life, Sienna, not just that day, but every day since. He traced the lines of her palm, now showing signs of years of work and motherhood. I was existing, not living. You taught me how to live again. She leaned forward to kiss him, marveling that, after 15 years, her heart still quickened at his touch. We taught each other. As they sat together watching the fire, secure in their love and the life they'd created from that chance meeting in a snowstorm, both reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment, the hardships overcome, the joys discovered, the family forged through love and determination. Outside, snow began to fall gently, coating the ranch in pristine white, much like the day they'd met. But inside, all was warmth and light, a beacon in the Montana wilderness built by two souls who had found in each other exactly what they needed. "I love you, Xavier Vaughn," Sienna whispered, resting her head on his shoulder. "And I love you, Sienna Vaughn," he replied, his arm tightening around her, "through every storm until the end of our days." In the years that followed, their love story became something of a legend in Jerome and throughout Montana, the tale of the cowboy and the schoolteacher brought together by a blizzard, whose love had built not just a ranch but a legacy. Their children and eventually grandchildren carried forward their values of hard work, education, and community service, expanding the Vaughn name beyond ranching into business, politics, and philanthropy throughout the developing West. But for Xavier and Sienna, the heart of their story remained simple: two wounded souls who found healing in each other's arms, proving that even in the harshest winter, love could bloom, bringing warmth that would last a lifetime.